Greetings, anonymous party members. Greetings also to those of you who are considering joining the movement. I promised in my first video that on December the 19th I would release a video about the Bill of Rights. The reason I said December 19th was because apparently my memory was bad, but what I was going for was the date that the Bill of Rights was ratified, which was not December the 19th. That date held a different significance to me and somehow got mixed up, and I apologize. The date that the Bill of Rights was ratified was December the 15th. So that's the date that I intended to release this video, and as soon as I began my research on it again, it became immediately obvious that I had made an error. So I apologize for that, but so the Bill of Rights. For those of you who are not extremely familiar with it, when the original Constitution was written and they were debating on whether or not they wanted to ratify it, because some of them wanted more things to be laid out in that document and others wanted, well, there was a differing of opinions on what exactly needed to be in that document, but a common complaint about it was that it did not outline what rights the people had. It only outlined what the government could do, with a couple exceptions. But it was eventually ratified on the condition that a Bill of Rights would be added onto it as soon as possible. And so over the coming months after the Constitution was ratified, they proposed 12 amendments, 10 of which were actually ratified. The other two actually, I believe, had something to do with how Congress was either elected or operated. I forget exactly the wording on those. But so we'll go ahead and jump right into it. The 10 that were ratified are now the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, this amendment actually kind of protects multiple things, but the general scope is that it's freedom of speech. And freedom of religion, but freedom of opinion, really, above anything. And the first statement in here, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, is essentially just saying that government is not allowed to say, this is the national religion, we're going to go with, Taoism, or anything, period. It just can't make a national religion, or even to really any significant degree declare that one should be practiced above any of the others. Now the second portion of that basic one is or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So while it can't declare a national religion, neither can it condemn any religion. The only exception to that would be any practices of that religion which would violate the rights of others. There are a few instances where I think that it is actually necessary for government to step in and say, hey, you're not allowed to do that, even though it's a religious practice. I mean, if we had volcano worshippers in our society today, and maybe we do, I don't know, but and then we had an active volcano, and they decided that the only way to keep that volcano from erupting and killing people was to throw a young virgin into the volcano. Well, chances are that young virgin would not want to be thrown into the volcano, and so this would be a violation of her rights, namely her right to life. So the government being able to say, hey, you're not allowed to throw virgins into volcanoes, at least not without their consent, it's a necessary restricting of a religious practice, but only because it's to protect the rights of somebody else. Okay, next statement is, or abridging the freedom of speech. Now, abridging is in any way, shape, or form restricting the freedom of speech, or rewriting the freedom of speech or the press. All this is to say is that if you have an opinion, you should be able to express that opinion without the government saying, oh, well, that guy, he's no good. And to some degree, we do still enjoy a larger amount of this than many other nations do, and especially more than many other nations in the past have. I mean, I've been putting out these videos here for about 6 weeks now, since I put out the first one, and nobody's come knocking on my door to tell me to knock it off. I've only even had 1 or 2 people think that I was, or at least tell me that they thought that I was being foolish in even doing this. Not everyone's as supportive as some, but you'll have that with whatever you're doing. Continuing on, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, this is the freedom of protest to a degree. If you want to get together to say, hey, we don't like what you're doing, government, then you have the right to do so, so long as you remain peaceful. That's, you're protesting, you're getting your message out, but you're not obstructing things, you're not getting in the way, you're not, especially not getting violent, because that's obviously not peaceful, or peaceable assembly. It's fairly self-explanatory. I think most of the reason people don't always understand it is because it's not really taught in school to the degree that I really think it should be. Really, the Constitution, and especially the Bill of Rights. If people taught the Bill of Rights in school, we only really ever went over the First Amendment, as far as I can recall, in school. This is the only amendment that they ever went over. But if they went over this in school, the whole thing, I think people would understand it a little bit better. But when I was in school, it was covered one day out of the entire, I think it was in either 6th or 7th grade history, and I really don't think that's enough. So if you teach history, you might want to at least do like a week or a couple week long focus on the Bill of Rights, where that's the entire focus of the course for considerably longer than what the history books would have you do. Okay, moving on to the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, a well-regulated militia, that's the first, up to the first comma. That's obviously not a declaration of a right. It's part of a preamble or partial explanation for the right, which is declared at the end of the thing. It says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, keep in mind it says keep and bear arms. That means you should be allowed to own them, and then you should be allowed to carry them. And it says, shall not be infringed. Now, infringed is in any way restricted, period. And they're doing that. The only way, personally, I don't even see why they don't allow convicted felons to own them. If they're so bad that they cannot be trusted out there with a gun, they shouldn't be out of jail. Because if they're that dangerous of a person in the first place to where you can't trust them with a gun, why let them out of jail? If they're going to get a gun, if they want to go get a gun after they're a convicted felon, guess what? They've already demonstrated that they don't want to obey the law. They're going to go get one again. If they have that inclination, the law is not going to stop them. It's just possibly going to slow them down a couple of days. Maybe. Depends on where they're at and how well connected they were before they became a felon. If they're that dangerous, they should either be still in jail or they should have been sentenced to death. I mean, but I'm not saying that every person who is considerably or possibly considered a threat should be put to death. Certainly not. That punishment should be reserved for the absolute worst offenders, namely those who have demonstrated that they will not hesitate to take a life on purpose. Yeah. Now, this particular amendment actually does have a lot of backstory. Now, I've read the I guess it'd be called the diary. I think it was called the Diary of Benjamin Franklin. It was the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. He actually was, for a considerable portion of his life, a very big supporter of British rule. He wanted to help the king out as much as he could. He was an ambassador to England from the state of, or the colony of Philadelphia, or Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia, and when they would send troops to the Americas to help fight off Indians and the French and anybody else who was trying to invade, because there were actually occasionally groups that would try to invade the colonies. Indians were a very common one, and it's an entirely different argument whether or not they should have had the right to or not, but we'll just ignore that whole story for now, just for the purposes of what I'm trying to explain. When Benjamin Franklin was working with them, he said, "Hey, listen, if it'll help out, we can organize a militia to help defend the colonies. If you know, in the event that the redcoats aren't available to help us out right at that moment, if we've got the people trained in themselves to actually deal with that threat, it can be dealt with a lot quicker and with a lot less casualties. The colonies will be a safer place, and everyone will be happier, and you know, British rule will be great." And the king was like, "Oh, if they learn how to fight, then maybe they'll revolt, because they'll realize they're stronger." Because I mean, there were more people in the colonies than there were in England, I believe, by the time of the Revolution. However, the United States, obviously, well, the colonies were not well trained enough. They were not big enough military that they could have escaped British rule easily. They didn't have nearly as many military personnel. Almost nobody from the States was technically in the military. So the king didn't want them to, and in fact, that offer made him extremely nervous. And a few years later, he actually attempted to confiscate as many of the guns as possible from the colonists. So that was one of the main things that kicked off the Revolutionary War. Was them saying, or at least kicked them into the mode where they didn't want to be taxed, was, why can't we have a voice in whether or not we get to have guns and defend ourselves? They were very upset about that, and that's what kicked them into wanting to defend or at least kicked them into demanding representation in the British government. And then when they also, you know, they're like, well, when they started thinking about it, they're like, well, we're paying taxes, why shouldn't we be represented? Why shouldn't we at least have a voice in whether or not we can have guns? Even if it's overruled by, you know, a majority of other voices, why can't we at least have a voice in it? So it was this gun issue that was the key thing that led to the Revolutionary War. And the funny thing is the king thought that by taking their guns away, he would prevent a revolution, and the exact opposite was true. They were more than willing to help defend themselves to remain under British rule until the king tried to take the guns away. So it was taking the guns away that drove them to revolt. Let that be a lesson to you, anyone who is currently in government and trying to take guns away. Third Amendment. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Now, we really don't have much of a problem with violating this one, as far as I'm aware. At least not any time in my lifetime, and probably for a considerable amount of time before it, if ever. But all it's really saying is that in times of peace, the government is not allowed to make you take in soldiers or any military personnel and house them, period. At least not without your, they can ask you, if you will, but they cannot make you. Now it says, in times of war, it is only allowed to make you, but only in a manner prescribed by law. It's not like they can just walk in and say, hey, you need to house these troops. It's going to be a law that will dictate exactly how residences are chosen and how many troops and all that type of stuff. But I don't really expect with all the, especially not with all the spending that we do, and with all the facilities and technology that we have, that this is really ever going to be a problem. So we'll just continue. Number 4, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by an oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, this one we have been having a large problem with. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. Now, persons, that's, you shall not be allowed to be searched, nor shall your house, which should include apartment or condo or tent or whatever you live in, mobile home, that doesn't matter, hole in the ground, wherever it is that you live, so long as it's yours and you're legally allowed to be there, they have no right to search you or your house. Your papers, which, transcending with technology, should include any of your electronic documents as well. But it also says effects, which are any of your personal belongings against unreasonable searches and seizures. Now, whether or not papers should include electronic documents or not, effects certainly should, because that's all your personal things. That's, personal effects back in the day would have been like your wallet and your glasses, your hat, your coat, your briefcase, whatever else you may have been carrying, any of your personal items. And anybody's laptop computer or their phone or any other thing would actually fit under those, underneath those coverages. They just would not be allowed to search those things without a warrant. And that warrant would have to, as it continues on, it says, no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause. Now, the warrants have to be issued on probable cause. That means your car or your computer or your phone or wallet or wherever that proves that you did what you're being accused of doing, whatever that may be. So all of these programs that the government has going on right now, like the program that records all of your phone calls, even though they're not actually listening to them, if they're recording them, regardless of why they're recording them, they don't have a warrant to do that. They don't have a warrant to go in and make copies of everything that you've done. They don't have a warrant to go in and record all of your phone conversations, regardless of whether or not anyone's actually listening to them. Nobody has a warrant for this stuff. Nobody should be listening to it, even if it is just a computer program that's scanning it for keywords like backpacks and pressure cookers and black powder. I mean, just because you wrote those 3 words in an email doesn't mean that you should be getting a visit from Homeland Security. It's ridiculous that this kind of stuff is going on. There's no probable cause in mentioning or even searching for or talking about anything to do with anything that's illegal. You can talk about growing pot all day long. You can talk about plans to kill the president, so long as you're not actually planning it. It's not. It shouldn't really be illegal. It shouldn't be anything that they could arrest you for. You may want the president dead, but I mean that's your opinion, and you have the right to have that opinion. Personally, I think that's a little extreme. I don't like the way he's doing his job any more than most of America, from what I'm aware. But it doesn't mean that I want him dead. Certainly not that I want to kill him. But in fact, I'd rather he remain alive to see the results of this project, which hopefully succeeds, and sees how rational thinking, non-elite, normal people who have actually had to live normal lives can actually handle a government. See how it can actually bring common sense to it. Restore some normalcy to government, because they're just not used to it. And all of our government officials, if someone could prove to them that compromise isn't always necessary, but knowing when it is and when it isn't necessary is a major quality in a person. Knowing what compromises to make, how much of a compromise to make, and like I said, when to compromise, and but most of all, what ideas actually need to be pushed and carried out. So I don't really want the president dead, but if anyone wishes to express their desire that he should be dead, that's their opinion, and they should have every right to say that without having Homeland Security or the Secret Service or anybody really knocking on their door. So long as they don't have laid out plans for exactly how to bring that about, and even more so, yes, that they haven't actually gone out and started purchasing the necessary tools to make that happen, or paying people for the connections to make that happen. If any of that starts to take place, then yes, then they have every right to. They have probable cause to actually come and say, hey, we believe you're trying to plot to kill the president, and then they have the right to search your stuff to confirm whether or not that suspicion was correct. But using that scenario, it says, particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, the place to be searched, this would also include the items to be searched. If the place is your computer, then they're obviously looking for files. If it's the internet, which is kind of a place, they need they really should have a warrant for exactly what they're looking for, by who, and all that good stuff. It may not have to be ridiculously specific to say, oh, we're looking for an email from so-and-so to so-and-so on this date at this time that says these exact words. Well, they're not going to be able to get that specific, so if they knew that much, they'd already pretty much have it. And that obviously would indicate that they are still spying unfairly, unconstitutionally. So if they said, we believe he's involved in this, we have this evidence that we've been able to gather just from sworn witnesses, whatnot, then yes, then they'd have enough to say, okay, we want to search his computer, and we want to search his desk at home for any information or any indication that he's plotting to kill the president. And then they would be able to go search that, and if they found anything, they would be able to seize that, and if that stuff existed, they would probably also be allowed to seize the person who was doing the plotting, and that would all be reasonable. But they are they're searching all of our electronic data all the time, and there is no warrants for that. There are tools that they use to spy on us that require nothing more than paperwork being filed saying that they are doing it, which is not exactly a warrant. It's what they call a blanket warrant in some cases, and blanket warrants cover a large degree of information or people that they're suddenly allowed to spy on or search or seize, even in some cases, that don't specify and particularly describe the place to be searched. So it's not constitutional. It's wrong when they issue these blanket warrants. They're trampling the Bill of Rights when they do that, or at least the Fourth Amendment. Moving on now, Amendment number 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Now this one is kind of long and covers several related things, but the first one, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime. Capital crime would be one in which your life is at stake if you are convicted. Capital punishment. But it says, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. So, if you are indicted, then you can be required to testify against yourself. There are very specific criteria for when a grand jury or an indictment is used, but it's not really common. It's not really uncommon either, but it is very specific. In most cases where people are not in positions of extreme importance, usually head CEOs and companies and military personnel are often in that category. So, but continuing on, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. So, all this is really adding is that you can also be made to testify against yourself if you are serving in the Army, Navy, Air Force, or the National Guard, or in any other type of militia, if you are accused of a crime that is in relation to that service, or at least while on duty, or whatever the case may be, in any time of war or public danger. Time of public danger may be something else. Sometimes the National Guard is mobilized for other projects like flood control, or I think even at some points in history, although I think it's been a while, like firefighting in town, not on army bases, but stuff like that. If you're accused of a crime while in that service, then you can be made to testify against yourself because of what you were doing. You're on the taxpayer's dollar, perhaps, or at least operating on behalf of your country and not just of yourself. So if you're accused of that crime, then you can be required to testify exactly what was going on, even if it does incriminate you. Continuing on now, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. All that's saying is that if you're being tried for a crime for which you can be either killed or have a hand cut off or something, which we don't really do that anymore. But if you're being tried for a crime which has those as its punishment, you cannot be accused of that same crime again. You'd have to commit another crime. If you're found innocent of it once, they can't just be like, oh, well, we didn't like the outcome, we're going to try them again. See if we can get, set of jurors that's a little more sympathetic to our side. They can't just keep trying you and trying you and trying you until they have success. Continuing on, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. This is saying that you're not required to testify against yourself in a criminal case that's outside of a capital crime or in a presentment of an indictment or grand jury, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now, this one is where I take issue with the EPA and with some other practices. The road projects back in the 50s and 60s, they had a little bit of this going on, but usually those ones there was compensation. But the EPA has seized a lot of land from a lot of people without actually paying them for it, because they designated it wetlands or swamplands or other type of protected areas, and they just take property away from people. Or they say that people are using their property wrong and they take it away, and this kind of stuff it's just downright not fair, especially when people have saved their money or at least have been responsible for at least some portion of their life and have been able to go and purchase some land or pay for it outright, I believe, in at least a few cases. But if they're able to just walk in and take that away without even a court case, it's unconstitutional, and it's just plain not fair. I mean, nobody wants their stuff just taken away from them just because of some goofy technicality that no one was really aware of when they bought it. If, let's just say we had some new bureau of government, we'll call them the E-Squad. They walk into your house and they take your flat screen TV, your brand new LED 65-inch smart TV, right? They just walk right in and take it. They're like, hey, what are you doing? That's my TV. And they're like, oh, we're with the E-Squad. We're taking your TV. And they're like, well, why? Like, well, all TVs manufactured by this TV company between March and June of this particular year, which yours is included, were loaded with this particular software that we have deemed as a hazard to the community, the electronic community, and so we're taking this television and destroying it. And they're like, well, are you going to pay me for it? Nope, we're taking it. We have to get rid of this right now. Well, you wouldn't like that, would you? I mean, especially on a 60-inch smart TV, I think the cheapest I've ever seen anything like that was about $1,200, and that was the day after Thanksgiving. So you don't want to just see $1,200 walking right out the door. I don't care how much money you have, you don't want to see your $1,200 TV, $1,200 or more TV, just walk right out the door. I mean, that's theft. It doesn't matter who takes it or what badge they show you or what you can do about it. It's theft, and the government has no business doing stuff like that. Now, imagine how much worse it is if the E-Squad walks in and says, oh, is this one of those smart TVs? Okay, well, we're taking your entire house. Get out. I'm like, why? Well, your electric grid is contaminated by this television. You have to get out. It's not safe anymore. Well, you're not going to be happy about that, especially if they're not going to get you a new house, or at least pay for you to get yourself a new house. That's not fair, and that's why they included this type of stuff in here. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Now, this one is just a small little loophole for the government to be able to take land when it's absolutely necessary, but it still requires them to pay you for it. Now, back when this was written, taxation was something that was done entirely differently. It was generally, the the annual budget for government was this, there's this many, at the time, male landowning citizens, and so each of them would have to pay, we'll just say $1, because $1 was actually a fair amount of money back then, but every landowning man in the nation had to pay $1 in taxes, and then the government was like, well, we have, 13 million people, so that's $13 million, and back then, again, tons of money, so that would be their budget for the year. Well, if they can't afford to buy all that land, then they weren't going to, and that was just the way they thought back then. So the without just compensation thing was supposed to be a preventative of the government from doing it too much. Well, the government still kind of does do it a little too much, and during the road projects in the 50s, they compensated for stuff, but not everybody really wanted to sell it. And it was arguable as to exactly how absolutely necessary it was. Now, don't get me wrong, I enjoy and frequently use the interstate highway system, but it wasn't an absolute 100% necessity. It does expedite the shipping of things by truck, and even getting people from point A to point B, especially when you're going across the country or even a significant distance across the country. But it wasn't an absolute necessity, and it wasn't absolutely necessary that they put all of them exactly where they were. So if somebody really, really didn't want to sell, they shouldn't have been forced to sell, because some of them were given less than what they felt their property was worth. Some of them were given more. In fact, I believe most of them were given more, but not all of them really wanted to sell. So it was kind of a sad situation for a few people. I recall my father told me a story about a farmer in I don't remember exactly where it was, but it was somewhere between Fort Wayne and Indianapolis, who kept tearing down the fence that they built while they were building the highway, and he kept letting his cattle run across the interstate as they were trying to build it, and he kept tearing down the fence. Every time they come put it back up, he'd tear it back down, his cattle would be wandering across the interstate, and it actually delayed opening the interstate between Fort Wayne and Indianapolis, because his cattle were still crossing it frequently in that area. So I don't remember exactly what the court thing was, but they took a chunk right out of the middle of his land, and he wasn't terribly happy about that. He still had a fair amount of land, but when you've got a barn way over here, and most of your pasture's way over there, and this road comes right between it, well, it makes it a little difficult for your cattle to use that. So it wasn't really a great thing for him. They should have, as part of his compensation, they should have either put like a tunnel under it for him and or his cattle to go through, or at least built him another barn or something. I don't know. But whatever the case was, his house was on one side and most of his pasture was on the other, and it just wasn't a fun story for him. But eventually they put an end to the cattle thing. But I'm going to go ahead and split this up into two videos, since it's probably going to be considerably longer than most people are going to watch all in one sitting. And if you do, well, you can just click on the other video as well. So we'll continue this in the next video.